Freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed. Those words were spoken by Martin Luther King Jr. more than 60 years ago during America's civil rights struggle. For many older Americans, they still bring back vivid memories of marches, sermons, and the fight for dignity. Today, far from the streets of Atlanta or Washington, those same words have found new life in Africa, where a young leader named Ibrahim Traoré speaks of sovereignty with a fire that both inspires and unsettles. For more than 1 billion people across the continent, the digital age has been a story of dependency. Every email, every payment, and every search query made in cities from Accra to Ouagadougou traveled first across oceans to servers in Europe or the United States before returning home. Imagine sending a letter to your next-door neighbor, but being forced to ship it first to Paris or New York. That was daily reality for Africans living in the 21st century. The costs were punishing. Families in Burkina Faso sometimes spent a week's wages simply to keep children connected for school. Farmers who wanted to use online platforms to sell crops paid fees so high that their profits disappeared. Students researching African history often found more material about Europe than about their own empires and leaders. This was not progress. It was dependence written into the very structure of modern technology. And yet, when African leaders began to speak of sovereignty in food, in gold, and now in data, the reaction from the outside world was not encouragement, but suspicion. The very ideals of self-reliance that are praised in the West were painted as dangerous when embraced in Africa. Burkina Faso, a small landlocked country long considered too weak to set its own course, has now stepped forward with one of the most ambitious projects of the century. Under the leadership of Ibrahim Traoré, it has begun to build digital highways of its own, independent of Silicon Valley's grip. This is more than cables and data centers. It is a statement that dignity and power must rest in the hands of a people, not in distant corporations. So stay with me, because this story is not only about technology. It is about whether a continent that was once overlooked can finally claim its independence in the digital age, and in doing so, remind the world what freedom truly means. To understand why Ibrahim Traoré's vision has captured global attention, we need to look closely at the daily reality that millions of Africans faced before this bold move. For decades, the internet across Africa was built on someone else's terms. Every email, video call, or bank transaction traveled thousands of miles to servers in Europe or the United States before returning to the continent. Imagine mailing a letter to the person living next door, but being forced to send it across the Atlantic first. That was the reality of digital life in Africa. This system was inefficient and unfair. Internet service was slow, unreliable, and among the most expensive in the world. A family in Burkina Faso might spend a week's wages to pay for data, so their children could attend online classes. Farmers who wanted to use digital platforms to sell their crops often paid inflated fees that ate away at already small profits. Students searching for information about African history often found more details about Napoleon than about the Mali Empire. The system was designed to keep Africa dependent, mirroring older patterns where resources flowed outward and wealth concentrated elsewhere. It was this background of dependency that set the stage for a dramatic decision. Ibrahim Traoré, still in his mid-30s, announced that Burkina Faso and its partners across Africa would build their own digital highways. The plan included over 100,000 kilometers of fiber optic cable and 47 data centers stretching from Dakar to Nairobi. More than infrastructure, it was a declaration that Africa would no longer rent space on someone else's network. It would own the very roads on which its future would travel. The gamble was enormous. Building such a system required billions of dollars, years of engineering work, and the risk of provoking powerful resistance. Yet the potential rewards were equally massive. Analysts estimated that Africa was losing around $50 billion to foreign digital services. If that money stayed within the continent, it could fund universities, hospitals, startups, and entire industries. For a farmer in Bobo Dioulasso, it meant using an app built in Ouagadougou instead of paying fees to a foreign company. For a student in Nairobi, it meant streaming lectures without interruption. For a shopkeeper in Lagos, it meant faster and cheaper transactions that made small businesses more competitive. The turning point came when the system went live. Within days, more than 200 million Africans switched to the new network. No platform in Silicon history, not even Facebook or TikTok, had grown at that pace. Executives in California held emergency meetings, stunned that their dominance could be broken overnight. For the first time, the monopoly was not just challenged, but bypassed. The new African protocol was deliberately designed to be incompatible with Google's crawlers and Microsoft's cloud services. It was a clean break, and it shook the foundation of global digital power. In the streets of Ouagadougou and Nairobi, the change was felt in simple ways. Students downloaded books in seconds instead of minutes. Farmers checked weather forecasts without worrying about high data costs. Families no longer had to choose between groceries and internet bills. The transformation was not abstract. It was personal and immediate, woven into daily life. The announcement of this project marked a new chapter, not only for Burkina Faso, but for all of Africa. It was not merely about technology. It was about sovereignty. Just as nations once fought for control over their land and their gold, they were now fighting for control over their data. For Traore, sovereignty was not a slogan. It was the foundation of a free society. Yet as millions celebrated faster and cheaper access, critics inside and outside Africa asked the same question. Could this bold step endure against pressure from powerful corporations and governments that had no intention of giving up control? When the switch was finally flipped, the reaction stunned even those who believed in the project. Within days of launch, over 200 million Africans had migrated to the new continental network. The scale of adoption broke every record in the history of digital platforms. Neither Facebook nor TikTok nor WhatsApp had ever seen such explosive growth in such a short span of time. For the first time in living memory, the flow of data that had always circled through Europe and America began to circulate within Africa itself. The monopoly of Silicon Valley was not simply challenged. It was bypassed. In the streets of Ouagadougou, young people celebrated as if a new independence had been declared. Students posted videos of seamless streaming lectures and shouted that the internet finally felt like theirs. In Nairobi, entrepreneurs reported lower transaction fees within days, opening new opportunities for business. In Lagos, small shops rejoiced as online payment systems no longer drained their margins. For families in Burkina Faso, the change was simple but powerful. They no longer had to choose between groceries and school internet bills. Ordinary people could feel the difference in their daily lives. Yet the excitement was matched by unease. Older citizens remembered too many projects that promised transformation but delivered disappointment. A retired teacher in Kudugu recalled how foreign aid projects once built schools that fell into disrepair within a year. Farmers in rural areas had heard bold announcements before, only to watch corruption or mismanagement swallow the benefits. They asked quietly whether this time would be different. The new system brought hope, but it also brought fear that it might collapse under the weight of its own ambition. Reactions outside Africa were even sharper. In Silicon Valley, executives at Google and Microsoft convened emergency meetings. The new African protocol was deliberately incompatible with their systems, meaning they could not index, track, or profit from vast amounts of new data. What they once controlled had slipped from their hands overnight. Reports from California described the mood as disbelief mixed with alarm. If Africa could do this, might other regions follow? Could this be the beginning of a fragmented internet where Western corporations no longer held the keys? In Washington, policymakers debated whether Africa's move represented a threat to global security. Some argued that a splintered internet would weaken the ability of the United States to monitor cyber threats. Others warned that sanctions might be justified if the system undermined Western influence. In Paris and Brussels, governments feared losing cultural dominance. For decades, French and European institutions shaped the flow of information in Africa. Now, local content was rising to the top of search results, replacing narratives that had long reinforced foreign perspectives. Across Africa, civil society groups raised another set of questions. Could governments resist the temptation to abuse this new sovereignty? Would digital independence be used to strengthen democracy or to silence dissent? Activists warned that sovereignty must be matched with responsibility. Without discipline, freedom could be corrupted from within. The debate was fierce, and it underscored the fact that independence is never without risk. For Ibrahim Traoré, the moment was both triumph and test. He declared that dependence ends the day people decide it ends. His words spread like wildfire across African social media, becoming a rallying cry for young citizens hungry for change. Yet at the same time, his leadership faced scrutiny. Could a leader in his 30s truly carry the burden of guiding a continent toward a new digital order? Would the institutions around him be strong enough to resist corruption and external pressure? The air was charged with both pride and uncertainty. Crowds celebrated faster internet and cheaper costs. Farmers imagined better markets. Students dreamed of a future where African history was told by Africans. But outside powers watched with suspicion, calculating how to respond. Global corporations counted potential losses in billions, while governments weighed the risk of losing influence over a continent on the rise. The central question lingered in every conversation. Would this digital revolution strengthen Africa's sovereignty? Or would it ignite a backlash powerful enough to crush it? The answer, many believed, would shape not only the destiny of Burkina Faso, but the balance of power in the 21st century. The launch of Africa's own digital network was not just about cables and servers. It reshaped the everyday lives of millions of ordinary people. In Ouagadougou, families discovered that monthly internet costs fell to a fraction of what they once paid. Parents no longer had to decide between paying for food or paying for their children's online education. For many, this simple change was the first tangible proof that sovereignty could touch their daily lives. Job creation was another visible impact. Thousands of engineers, technicians, and construction workers were employed during the building of fiber optic lines and data centers. Once the system was operational, an entirely new industry emerged. Young programmers in Bobo Dioulasso were hired to develop apps tailored for local farmers. Maintenance crews in Koudougou were trained to manage data hubs. Women who once sold vegetables in markets opened small internet cafes, confident that stable and affordable connections would bring steady customers. The multiplier effect rippled outward, reaching communities that had never before benefited from national infrastructure projects. Education saw remarkable improvements. With faster and cheaper access, students in rural towns streamed lectures without interruption. University libraries partnered with the new network to digitize African scholarship that had long been hidden. A student searching for the history of the Mali Empire now found African historians at the top of results rather than summaries written abroad. For young people, the internet became not only a tool for study, but a mirror reflecting their own culture. One student at the University of Ouagadougou described it simply, "For the first time, the internet feels like ours." Politically, the project became a defining symbol of Ibrahim Traoré's leadership. Supporters hailed him as the first African leader of his generation, willing to challenge global monopolies head-on. His speeches about sovereignty resonated deeply with citizens who had grown tired of dependency. In the eyes of many, he had transformed from a soldier into a statesman, carrying the weight of an entire continent's aspirations. Yet the same project also carried serious political risks. Opposition figures warned that without strict transparency, the billions invested in infrastructure could be lost to corruption. Civil society leaders demanded guarantees that the new digital sovereignty would not be abused to monitor or silence dissent. The memory of past projects loomed large. Citizens remembered roads that crumbled after ribbon-cutting ceremonies and foreign loans that enriched elites while ordinary people remained in poverty. Trust had to be earned, and skepticism remained strong. Within Burkina Faso's government, the railway of data also shifted power balances. Ministries competed over control of contracts and access to resources. Some officials saw the network as an opportunity to enrich themselves, while others recognized it as a national lifeline that must be protected at all costs. How the government managed these internal tensions would determine whether the project became a symbol of unity or another battlefield of political rivalry. Beyond national politics, the digital revolution enhanced Burkina Faso's influence in the region. For decades, the country had been viewed as a small, landlocked nation on the margins of West African affairs. Now it held something valuable, a transport corridor for information that linked millions of people. Within ECOWAS, Burkina Faso began to wield greater leverage, shaping debates on trade and regional cooperation. Neighbors that once dismissed its voice now had to listen more carefully. For ordinary citizens, however, the measure of success was simple. Did the trains of data run on time? Did electricity stay on in schools? Did farmers see better prices for their crops? A mother in Ouagadougou asked whether her family could travel safely across the digital landscape without exploitation. A student in Nairobi asked if her degree would now open doors at home, rather than forcing her abroad. A farmer in Kaya asked if his harvest could finally reach buyers before it spoiled. These personal questions became the true test of whether the revolution mattered. And while citizens judged the project by light bulbs, harvests, and paychecks, powerful nations abroad judged it by something else. To them, it was not simply about families or students. It was about influence, power, and who would control the future of a continent. The bold decision to create an independent African internet did not go unnoticed beyond the continent. In Washington, analysts debated late into the night about what this meant for American interests. For decades, the United States had used its dominance in technology and finance to project power across the globe. Control over cloud services, data flows, and payment systems gave it a kind of influence that no army could achieve. Suddenly, a small nation in West Africa had taken the first step to bypass that system. Some American policymakers worried that if Africa could succeed, others might follow, eroding one of Washington's most powerful tools of leverage. In Europe, the mood was equally anxious. France, with its long colonial history in West Africa, felt particularly threatened. For generations, French culture, language, and institutions had shaped narratives across the region. Now, search results began to highlight African voices before French ones. Paris saw not only the loss of economic influence, but also the decline of cultural authority. European Union leaders issued cautious statements about the importance of global stability, but behind closed doors, officials admitted deep concern that their relevance in Africa was fading. China, on the other hand, watched with interest. Over the past 2 decades, Beijing had invested billions in African infrastructure, often through debt-financed projects. A new digital network that weakened American tech monopolies aligned well with China's broader strategy of challenging Western dominance. Although Beijing did not openly claim involvement, many speculated that Chinese engineers and companies might quietly benefit from Africa's push for sovereignty. Elsewhere, the ripple effect was clear. In South America, leaders studied the African model as a possible blueprint for their own regional independence. In Asia, governments experimenting with alternative digital systems now had proof that such an ambitious idea could work on a continental scale. For the United States, the stakes were clear. A successful African internet was not simply a matter of local development. It signaled a world moving toward multiple centers of power rather than one dominated by Washington. The key question hanging in the air was simple, yet profound. Would this revolution become a bridge to unite economies or a battlefield where global powers clash for influence? And as the world argued, ordinary Africans returned to their daily lives, leaving one unanswered question. Could the dreams of millions survive the weight of global resistance? History does not often pause to watch a small, landlocked country in West Africa. Yet that is exactly what is happening now. Burkina Faso's digital revolution is more than a technical project. It is a test of resilience, governance, and vision. If it succeeds, it will show the world that even nations once dismissed as too weak can reshape their destiny. If it fails, it will be used as proof that Africa cannot govern itself, reinforcing the very stereotypes that leaders like Ibrahim Traoré are fighting to dismantle. The risks are real. Corruption could swallow the benefits. Political instability could slow or even destroy the momentum. External powers may try to undermine progress through sanctions or covert influence. There are also fears that governments inside Africa could abuse digital sovereignty to silence dissent rather than empower citizens. Each of these dangers is serious, and together they form a wall that Burkina Faso and its allies must climb. Yet the hope is undeniable. A functioning continental internet could transform lives on a scale rarely seen in history. Farmers gaining fair markets, students accessing knowledge in their own languages, and entrepreneurs building businesses without paying tribute to distant corporations all represent a new vision of independence. If Africa succeeds, the example will not stop at its borders. South America, Asia, and even citizens in the West may begin to question their own dependence on monopolies that shape their digital lives. The question that lingers is simple. Will this revolution endure as a shield for freedom or collapse into another broken promise? The answer will be written not in conference rooms, but in classrooms, markets, and homes across the continent. If this story has touched you, let your voice be heard. Silence has never protected the oppressed. Speak in the comments about what freedom means to you. If you believe in justice, dignity, and sovereignty, carry this story forward. Share it so others may see that even small nations can inspire the world. May God bless the people of Africa as they struggle for a dignity that cannot be bought or borrowed. And may we all remember that freedom is never given. It must be claimed, guarded, and lived.